Today we present you this video on the Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana, Sir Richard Burton, translator, 1883. The Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana, Sir Richard Burton, translator, 1883. Contents: the Kama Sutra is an ancient Indian text which is considered the primary Sanskrit work on human sexuality. It was written by Naga Vatsyayana in the 2nd century CE. Although Burton published this, the most widely known English translation, he was not the author of the translation, although he did provide footnotes and the introduction. The bulk of the translation was performed by an Indian archaeologist, Bhagwan Lal Indraji, and civil servant Foster Fitzgerald Buthnot, with the assistance of a student, Shivaram Pashuram Bahide. This is one of the first systematic studies of human sexual behaviour in world literature. It also documents the sociology of sex in India 18 centuries ago. And here is a summary of what's contained within this particular book. Part 1, introductory. Part 2, on sexual union. Part 3, about the acquisition of a wife. Part 4, about a wife. Part 5, about the wives of other people. Part 6, about courtesans. Part 7, on the means of attracting others to one's self. Preface. In the literature of all countries there will be found a certain number of works treating especially of love. Everywhere the subject is dealt with differently and from various points of view. In the present publication it is proposed to give a complete translation of what is considered the standard work on love in Sanskrit literature, and which is called the Vatsyayana Kama Sutra, or Aphorisms on Love by Vatsyayana. While the introduction will deal with the evidence concerning the date of the writing and the commentaries written upon it, the chapters following the introduction will give a translation of the work itself. It is, however, advisable to furnish here a brief analysis of works of the same nature, prepared by authors who lived and wrote years after Vatsyayana had passed away, but who still considered him as a great authority and always quoted him as a chief guide to Hindu erotic literature. Besides the treatise of Vatsyayana, the following works on the same subject are procurable in India: the Ratirahasya, or Secrets of Love; the Panchasakya, or the Five Arrows; the Smara Pradipa, or the Light of Love; the Rati Manjari, or the Garland of Love; the Ras Manjari, or the Sprout of Love; the Anangaranga, or the Stage of Love, also called Kamaled Lava, or a boat in the ocean of love. The author of the Secrets of Love was a poet named Kukoka. He composed his work to please one Venudutta, who was perhaps a king. When writing his own name at the end of each chapter, he calls himself Siddha Patiya Pandita, i.e. an ingenious man among learned men. The work was translated into Hindi years ago, and in this the author's name was written as Koka. As the same name crept into all the translations in other languages in India, the book became generally known and the subject was properly called Koka Shastra, or Doctrines of Koka, which is identical with the Kama Sutra, or Doctrines of Love, and the works Koka Shastra and Kama Sutra are used indiscriminately. The work contains nearly 800 verses and is divided into 10 chapters, which are called Pachivedas. Some of the things treated of in this work are not to be found in the Vatsyayana, such as the 4 classes of women, the Padmini, Chitrini, Shankini, and Hastini, as also the enumeration of the days and hours on which the women of the different classes become subject to love. The author adds that he wrote these things from the opinion of Ganika and Nandi Kishwara, both of whom are mentioned by Vatsyayana, but their works are not now extant. It is difficult to give any approximate idea as to the year in which the work was composed. It is only to be presumed that it was written after that of Vatsyayana and previous to the other works on the subject that are still extant. Vatsyayana gives the names of 10 authors on the subject, all of whose works he had consulted, but none are extant, and does not mention this one. This would tend to show that Kukoka wrote after Vatsya, otherwise Vatsya would assertedly have mentioned him as an author in this branch of literature along with the others. The author of the 5 arrows was one Jyotirisha. He is called the chief ornaments of poets, the treasure of the 64 arts, and the best teacher of the rules of music. He says that he composed the work after reflecting on the aphorisms of love as revealed by the gods, and studying the opinions of Ganikaputra, Muladeva, Babhravya, Ramtadeva, Nandikeshwara, and Kishmantra. It is impossible to say whether he had perused all the works of these authors or had only heard about them. Anyhow, none of them appear to be in existence now. This work contains nearly 600 verses and is divided into 5 chapters called Sayakas, or arrows. The author of the Light of Love was the poet Gunakara, the son of Vikapati. The work contains 400 verses and gives only a short account of the doctrines of love, dealing more with other matters. The Garland of Love is the work of the famous poet Jayadeva, who said about himself that he was a writer on all subjects. This treatise is, however, very short, containing only 125 verses. The author of the Spout of Love was a poet called Bhanudatta. It appears from the last years of the manuscript that he was a resident of the province of Tirhut, a son of a Brahmin named Ganeshwar, who was also a poet. The work, written in Sanskrit, gives the description of different classes of men and women, the classes being made out from their age, description, conduct, etc. It contains 3 chapters and its date is not known and cannot be ascertained. The Stage of Love was composed by the poet Kulyan Mul for the amusement of Lad Khan, the son of Amir Lodi, the same Lad Khan being in some places spoken of as Ladana Mul and in others as Ladan Abala. He is supposed to have been a relation or connection of the house of Lodi, which reigned in Hindustan from AD 1450 to 1526. The work would therefore have been written in the 15th or 16th century. It contains 10 chapters and has been translated into English, but only 6 copies were printed for private circulation. This is supposed to be the latest of the Sanskrit works on the subject, and the ideas in it were evidently taken from previous writings of the same nature. The contents of these works are in themselves a literary curiosity. They are to be found both in Sanskrit poetry and in the Sanskrit drama, a certain amount of poetical sentiment and romance which have, in every country and every plain language, thrown it in a moral halo around the subject, but here it is treated in a plain, simple matter of fact sort of way. Men and women are divided into classes and divisions in the same way that Buffon and other writers on natural history have classified and divided the animal world. As Venus was represented by the Greeks to stand forth as a type of the beauty of woman, so the Hindus described Padmini or lotus woman as a type of most perfect feminine excellence as follows. She in whom the following signs and symptoms appear is called a Padmini, or Padmini. Her face is pleasing as the full moon, her body well clothed with flesh is soft as a shiraz or mustard flower, her skin is fine, tender and fair as a yellow lotus, never dark coloured. Her eyes are bright and beautiful as the orbs of the fawn, well cut and with reddish corners. Her bosom is hard, full and high, she has a good neck, her nose is straight and lovely, and 3 folds or wrinkles cross her middle. About the umbilical region, her yoni resembles the opening lotus bud, and her love seed Kama Sutra is perfumed like the lily that has newly burst. She walks with swan-like gait, and her voice is low and musical as the note of the coquetta bird. She delights in white raiments, in fine jewels, and in rich dresses. She eats little, sleeps lightly, and being as respectful and religious as she is clever and courteous, she is never anxious to worship the gods and to enjoy the conversation of Brahmins. She is ever anxious to worship the gods and to enjoy the conversation of Brahmins. Such then is the Padmini or lotus woman. Detailed descriptions then follow of the Chirini or art woman, the Shankhini or conch woman, and the Hastini or elephant woman, their days of enjoyment, the various seats of passion, the manner in which they should be manipulated and treated in sexual intercourse, along with the characteristics of the men and women of the various countries in Hindustan. The details are so numerous and the subject so seriously dealt with and at such length that neither time nor space will permit of their being given here. One work in the English language is somewhat similar to these works on the Hindus. It is called Calogenomia, or the Laws of Female Beauty, being the elementary principles of that science by T. Bell, M.D., with 24 plates and printed in London in 1821. It treats of beauty, of love, of sexual intercourse, of the laws regulating that intercourse, of monogamy and polygamy, of prostitution, of infidelity, ending with a catalogue raisonné of the defects of female beauty. Other works in English also enter into great details of private and domestic life, the elements of social science or physical, sexual and natural religion, by a Doctor of Medicine, London 1880, and Every Woman's Book by Dr. Waters 1826. To persons interested in the above subjects, these works will be found to contain such details as have been seldom before published, and which ought to be thoroughly understood by all philanthropists and benefactors of society. After a perusal of the Hindu work and of the English book above mentioned, the reader will understand the subject, at all events from a materialistic, realistic and practical point of view. If all science is founded more or less on a stratum of facts, there can be no harm in making known to mankind generally certain matters intimately connected with their private, domestic and social life. Alas, complete ignorance of them has unfortunately wrecked many a man and many a woman, while a little knowledge of a subject generally ignored by the masses would have enabled numbers of people to have understood many things which they believed to be quite incomprehensible, or which were not thought worthy of their consideration. Introduction. It may be interesting to some persons to learn how it came about that Vatsyayana was first brought to light in translation and translated into the English language. It happened thus: while translating with the Pundits, the Ananga Ranga, or the stage of love, reference was frequently found to be made to one Vatsya. The sage Vatsya was of this opinion, or of that opinion. The sage Vatsya said this, and so on. Naturally, questions were asked who the sage was, and the Pundits replied that Vatsya was the author of the standard work on love in Sanskrit literature, that no Sanskrit library was complete without his work, and that it was most difficult now to obtain in its entire state. The copy of the manuscript obtained in Bombay was defective, and so the Pundits wrote to Benares, Calcutta and Jaipur for copies of the manuscript from Sanskrit libraries in those places. Copies having been obtained, they were then compared with each other, and with the aid of a commentary called Jaya Mangla. A revised copy of the entire manuscript was prepared, and from this copy the English translation was made. The following is the certificate of the chief pundit. Quote, the accompanying manuscript is corrected by me after comparing 4 different copies of the work. I had the assistance of a commentary called Jaya Mangla for correcting the portion in the first 5 parts, but found great difficulty in correcting the remaining portion, because with the exception of 1 copy thereof which was tolerably correct, all the other copies I had were far too incorrect. However, I took that portion as correct in which the majority of the copies agreed with each